All right, everybody. Happy Future Fridays. It is a Friday afternoon, another glorious one with all of you. And we have a very special guest with you today. We have Mr. Jeff Bryan, who teaches a variety of classes in our school district at San Clemente High School. Mr. Bryan has a lot of expertise in the area of game design. Not only does he teach game design, animation, 3D modeling, he's also doing research as a PhD student at UCI. So for those of you who didn't know, if you're into video game design or game design, not only can you test games, create great games, design games, but you can also research and study them at the university level, which is super exciting, right? So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and welcome our guest, Mr. Bryan, and let him take over and share all the cool things that he's doing in his classes right now. And then we will take some time at the end to answer questions as well. Mr. Bryan, welcome. Thank you so much for being with us. Take it away.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. I hope everyone is doing well. As was said, I'm Mr. Bryan. You can call me Jeff, and I teach game design and other digital arts topics, largely because to be able to design games, you need to learn lots of different fields. And so along the way, I picked up animation and 3D modeling and graphic design and all sorts of different things. So I end up teaching quite a number of things. It's not uncommon that they need some new field taught, and I'm able to do it. And it's a lot of fun. So I think what I'll do is share what we do and across various classes that I teach. And we'll start with game design. Game design, of course, is what you do to make games. And in many places, game design is a class about programming. But in the colleges that I have gone to, the focus has always been on the design aspect, on how to make games feel good and how to make games work right. And so I focus more on design. And as such, we always start our game design classes by making board games. And these are some of the student board games you can see here across various different years. I've taught from middle school to high school to college classes. And the board games really don't change too much across different age levels because anybody can make a board game. You could make a board game. You could go home and make one yourself. And they're fun, and they don't take any technical expertise to do. So it's a great way to enter into the world of game design. And as you can see, they come in lots of different shapes and forms. And then after we learn some basics about game design, we start using simple software to create more complex games and kind of slowly introduce the more technical aspects of it. But we never really get into programming or the more super technical end. We tend to stay more on the art and design focus of things until we get all the way to 3D modeled games using Unity or Unreal or various other engines along the way. So these are all some examples. Student work. Then we also teach animation. And we focus it on 2D animation. And as you can see, it involves lots of animating with lots of different things. And we follow what are called the 12 basic principles of animation that were developed by some Disney artists way back in the day. And they're still considered fundamental concepts in animation. And so students make various things according to various themes. I change it all the time. We use different software. We do everything from stop motion to using Adobe Animate on the computers. And do all sorts of fun things that students enjoy. And then we also do 3D modeling. And the 3D modeling students will also do some animating. It's focused more on goals like making a commercial or making particular movements happen to show physics engines, for instance, particle effects and things like that. And then we also just kind of model things. We try to make things that look real and look pretty and look amazing, things that are maybe impossible in the real world, but seem like they can feel real. It's not. And those are the three basic areas that I teach. Each of these fields, each of these classes overlap a lot in design. They overlap a lot in the skills that are taught and what they allow you to do. Any good game designer wants to learn all of these skills and more. It is good for any animator to also learn a lot about 3D because the 3D industry is huge. And of course, any 3D modeler should learn how to animate with their 3D modeling because that's a coordinating field. They're connected together. And then each of those fields should understand some basic concepts in game design because both of those fields are opportunities for jobs for any of those creative artists. So taking one class helps you be better at the other classes and vice versa. And then they open the door to all sorts of creative industries out there in film, television, and video games. And then generally speaking, my classes are studio classes. At the beginning of the year, we focus on learning some concepts, but over time, we move to a place where students are able to spend most of their class time simply working. They're often following tutorials that one can find on YouTube. But as their skills develop and they start to make their own objects, they find themselves more and more able to mess with the tools without instruction. But it takes a while because these are complicated tools that one can do a lot with. So if you take my classes, you can expect a lot of time provided for you to really explore 3D modeling, animation, and game design. Let me get back plugged in again. And I think the only thing that is also important is there was a time when these fields didn't require getting a degree, but we're kind of past that point now, largely because there are so many people who have degrees in these areas that even if you had a really, really strong portfolio, and a portfolio is like as if you had all of your work, all of the things you've ever made gathered together to show off to somebody. And a strong portfolio would mean that all of that work is really, 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 really good. Even if you had lots and lots of really, really, really good work, there are dozens and dozens and dozens of other people who also have really, really good work. And the difference between you and them might be that they have a degree from a college and you don't. And so generally speaking, when that is the case, those production studios would choose the person with the degree. It's not 100%. You can be so talented that you would be the person chosen. But as a general rule, if you want to work in film and animation and game design, you need to go to college. You need to find a college that focuses on those things, has a good network of connections, and can provide you with opportunities. And a great way to get started is to take classes like that in high school. So I think that covers the basics. And then it looks like there are a number of questions.
They're definitely coming in, and what we can do now is open it up to questions from the students, Mr. Bryan. So let's go ahead and do that. Everybody, if you do have questions, feel free to put it in the Q&A right now so that we can ask Mr. Bryan. You had mentioned, and I was just going to ask you this, the amount of education that students need, right? If they want to go into game design, and you would encourage them to get a college degree because it makes them more competitive to get a job. What kinds of things could they study in college? What kind of majors could they pursue if they wanted to get into game design?
Yeah, at this point, each of these fields have majors for their fields. In fact, they have majors that are split out into subcategories within their fields. Mm-hmm. And that's happened within the last decade or so. And you can find, even if they don't have a degree in these areas, you can find certificate programs, which aren't as valuable, but can be in almost any college now.
Okay, awesome. A lot of opportunities then. And for a lot of you out there, you can start taking some of these certificate pathway classes at community colleges when you're in high school too. So keep that in mind if you're interested in this. In addition to taking CCA classes to learn more about game design, you can also take them in community colleges. So let's see here. There have been a lot of questions coming in from students that have assumed that you have created video games. Did you, as part of your career pathway, did you work in game design?
I did not work in the industry. I have made games. I've never made anything commercial. I've made games that have been in, I don't know what you would call them, IndieCade, you know, like where they gather a bunch of game makers together to show off their games. Cool. To submit them to get in. So I've done it that. I'm mostly academic because what I really do with games, and the only reason I know anything about how to design them is I studied them. And that means I play games a whole lot. I play and play and play, and then I write about it. And that's my, like, teaching is my side job that I do for fun. And what I really do and what I really get paid for is play a whole bunch of games and then write about it.
That's super awesome. And Mr. Bryan, you have a really unique perspective on this, and you represent two different types of like career pathways that our students can pursue, because not only are you discussing with our 4th and 5th graders game design, which everybody's super interested in, but you're also in academia, right? Mm-hmm. So for those students who love to learn and want to learn for a really long time and are really into like a specific topic like you are, they should know that they can actually pursue that as a career and research the thing that they love and write about it and research about it and become innovators in that field. So that's really exciting as well. Joshua is really into learning all of this and wants to know what your favorite part of designing a game is.
I like solving problems. That's my favorite part. And every game has problems that need to be solved. So that's my favorite part of it, because you start with a kernel of something, a little idea, a little something, and maybe right from the start you're gonna immediately be like, well, how do I solve that? But sometimes everything seems to fit just great, and then you hit a roadblock. And that clever moment where you figure out how to get past that roadblock is so satisfying.
It definitely sounds like in game design that you have to be comfortable with solving problems. Just in every aspect, you're solving problems, right?
That is all of game design.
Yeah.
That is the best and worst part of game design, is that you are causing your own problems that then you have to solve.
Right. So keep that in mind, everybody. There's a lot of problem solving involved. It's not just all fun and games, right? There's a lot of problem solving to go into having the fun playing the game. Nika wants to know at what grade you can start taking these kinds of classes in our district. I know that you teach at the high school level, but we also offer our middle school CTE labs. And I believe that a lot of these labs at the middle school level will give you an opportunity, students, to explore either 3D design or digital arts. It just depends on the middle school you end up going to, but every middle school in our district has CTE like labs where you can explore different areas, and oftentimes they will include something in this realm of 3D modeling or digital arts or game design.
Yeah, and I don't know the middle schools here, but I've taught school before. I've taught the Unity tutorials, for instance. You should know that the biggest thing that I teach is that you could at any point learn this yourself, because all the tutorials you could ever need are on YouTube. And there's no reason I should be making up new tutorials when really, really great ones exist on the web. And I like to reinforce that you could do it at any point in time.
That's a great, I have a great follow-up question, because you mentioned YouTube, right, Mr. Bryan? So Savani actually asked, what websites can help us get an introduction to game design, and what websites can we use to design for free as a student?
So most of the companies that make game design software like Unity and Unreal and Stencil and Twine, all of them, almost all of them, offer their services for free to individuals. If your game becomes big, then part of that license makes it that they get some sort of money back at the stage of it. But unless the game makes it, the software is available for free. And they have every incentive in the world to get you to use their software. So they usually provide lots and lots and lots of very extensive tutorials on their website. So find a game engine, go to the game engine's website, and there are tons of professional tutorials designed by them. Otherwise, there's thousands on YouTube.
So it sounds like all of you have options that are completely free on the internet. YouTube sounds like a really great place to start. So that's maybe where you could start. Alexia wants to know about salary for game makers. We're just cutting right to the chase. She wants to know, is this a career that she can actually go into? So do you have kind of average salary for different fields within game design?
It really depends on what we're talking about. Different aspects of it pay different amounts, but you definitely can look at in the 60, 70, 80,000 for the early stages of things, because they take a high degree of technical skill. But you should also recognize that any job in the entertainment industry is not a stable job.
Okay.
It's usually contract jobs where you have a little bit of work for a little bit of time and then it goes away. And you have to constantly reapply, a lot of your job is looking for work all the time. And that's one of the benefits of going to college, because you build a very, very strong network of people. So I know people who work at Blizzard. I know people who work at Activision and Square. I know people who work in all sorts of the artist industries. I know people who are journalists, all who I met and worked with while at college.
Okay, another good incentive and a good reason to go to college, right, is for that ability to build that strong network so you can have more job opportunities if you're going to go into this field. So Ryan wants to know, and I know that you had mentioned earlier that you'd made games and kind of on your own, right? And Ryan wants to know what types of games you've made. So can you explain one of the games that you've made and just what the premise of it is?
So I made games in college, and I made games when I was going to graduate school for my master's degree. And so our focus was on exploring what games are and what they mean and what they could be. So the games that I made at that time were very, you would call them art games. They're weird. They're not things that most people would want to play. They explore things that games don't normally explore, and we find out there's good reason for that. So they're not very fun to play. I think there's one out there that might be able to be found called Quietus, Quietus. I'm not sure if it's still on the internet or not. I think that's the only one that was really sort of published.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Jordan wants to know what inspired you to go into game design.
I loved games. I was an English major for my bachelor's degree. And in college, everybody talked about books and film and television, and no one about games. And that was really disturbing to me because everything I knew about mythology and my favorite stories came from games when I was growing up. So I wanted to do with games what people were doing with books. And then I found out that there were a few other people who were doing the same thing right around the same time. So my whole academic field is a very, very, very young field, and there's lots and lots of opportunity.
Well, that's the fascinating part to me about your job, and that your focus is that it's focused on storytelling, which makes a really good game. If you're playing like an RPG or something that you're really into, it's probably because the story is so good and it sucks you into that world. So for those of you who are really into reading books, right, and reading fiction and very creative, and you like writing your own stories, definitely a niche in game design, or a part of game design, a large part of it that has to do with storytelling. So really, really good to know as well. Grace wants to know how long it takes usually to produce a video game.
Oh, that entirely depends on the game.
Uh-huh.
You know, we for classroom games, I usually need I usually need 6 weeks to get students to have developed their game. And then usually their games only last 5 minutes, maybe, if we're lucky. And a proper, like, well-scoped big game, those take years with hundreds of people working on them.
So that goes back to you saying earlier that, working in the industry can be unpredictable, and you'll have a job and then you won't have a job and you'll find another job. But if you're working on a really big game, you could have a job for several years and then be done and then have to find another one. So it's not that.
You can, but
Yeah.
often, even in those years-long projects, they're piecemealed out sections. And so they'll hire what they need to do this thing and then that job and then hire for another thing. The only time you really have control is when you're at the highest levels, you're like the lead designer or the lead artist, or you're making your own game as an indie artist, but that's extremely hard to do.
Okay, awesome. Thank you for clarifying that. Let's see here. I think Yasarsh wants to know what games you like. Do you have any personal favorites?
Yeah, I love RPGs, old school RPGs, probably just because that's what I grew up on. I don't like them as much now. I like those old Final Fantasy grind to level games, but I still love the sense of exploration. That's what I ultimately really love in a game, is to have one of those open worlds where I can find all sorts of things in all sorts of places. Right now I'm playing Genshin Impact, if anyone plays that.
I grew up, the only game that I was super into growing up was Chrono Trigger, and that's what I played in high school and has a very special place in my heart on Nintendo. So Daisy wants to know, what schools are you in? So do you want to tell them where you teach and also where you research?
Yeah, so I teach at San Clemente High School. I went to Southern Utah University for my bachelor's degree. I went to Georgia Tech for my master's, and I'm at UCI, University of California, Irvine, for my PhD.
Awesome, lots of schools there. Gina wants to know, this is a great question. What kind of student or person is successful at creating games? Or what kind of personality, this is how I'm interpreting it, Gina, is what kind of personality does well in game design in that world?
The kind of personality does well is the same kind of personality that does well in my classes and that I try to teach, which is someone who enjoys being challenged rather than seeks to be told how to solve problems. You will do well in my classes and in game design and in the industry if when presented with a problem, your first instinct is to solve it yourself, is to seek out answers, try. If your first instinct is go to the teacher and ask them to solve it for you, that will not result in a good career future for you in game design. You've gotta solve problems. You gotta love solving problems.
Big takeaway from today, most definitely. So what, I see a lot of questions coming in from our students about like what sites, again, what resources, what can they do as 9 and 10-year-olds right now? You had mentioned creating board games, right? So that sounds like something everybody can go home and just tinker with over the weekend and start making their own board game. Should they be drawing, learning code? Like, what do you recommend that they start right now?
You can. You know, if you like programming, you can go to scratch.mit.edu. That's a really great resource for low-level visual programming that teaches you some of the fundamentals. If you wanted to learn animation, you could get a free stop motion app on your phone. There's lots of those. You could also get an app called Flip-a-Clip that will teach you how to do 2D, not teach you, but will allow you to do 2D animation on your phone. It's free as well. You can go on your computer. If you want to learn 3D modeling, get Blender like we're using. It's also free. And it's a great resource, and there are thousands of videos online on how to use Blender. And then I've already mentioned several game design systems that you could use. And then, you know, games like Minecraft have plugins for systems where you could learn programming language Lua while building things, making through programming things in Minecraft.
Definitely. Okay, so one more question and then a final question for me. So Jordan actually wants to know what an RPG is. So I guess we didn't define that. So do you want to define what an RPG is?
Yeah, you know, I do that all the time. I have all sorts of words. They call them jargon that everyone knows, and then somebody doesn't. And it's a good reminder. An RPG is a role-playing game. And specifically, I like the Japanese role-playing games like Chrono Trigger, because that too, they were made by the same company as Final Fantasy, and I loved everything they produced.
Thank you, Mr. Bryan. And finally, we had so many questions. We had 243 questions in the Q&A. We don't have time to answer all of them, unfortunately. But as we wrap up, do you have any advice for our 9 and 10-year-olds in here, right? 4th and 5th graders, as they're exploring what they can pursue one day in their careers and what they can learn in high school and middle school? What's your advice to them as they're thinking about their future?
My advice is recognize that the tools you need to do this are right in front of you right now on your computer. And that at any point in time, you could download a piece of software, you could watch a YouTube video and learn how to do this. And by the time you get to me at high school, you could be better at it than I am. But it's just completely up to you.
Thank you for that piece of advice. That's actually very unique advice that we haven't heard in a while, which is that you can start doing all of this right now, everybody. Very valuable advice. And Mr. Bryan, thank you so much for your time. And boys and girls in here, thank you so much for being with us and always being so respectful and wonderful. With that, we are going to close up our Future Fridays for this week. And again, thank you so much, Mr. Bryan. We appreciate you and your time and your expertise. And students, thank you for being with us. Everybody have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you for meeting with me.
Thank you.